I'm Sarai.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio.
Welcome back to Seamwork Radio, where we share practical ideas for building a creative process so you can sew with intention and joy. So it's August, and that means it's time for the fall session of Design Your Wardrobe. So over the next 4 weeks, Haley and I are going to be taking you along as we do the entire Design Your Wardrobe program so you get a peek inside our personal processes. And today we're talking about week 1 of Design Your Wardrobe as we gather and process our inspiration. And if you want to join us for Design Your Wardrobe, it's actually not too late to sign up as of this recording going out. So registration closes on August 11th. You can just go to seamwork.com/go/DYW if you want to learn more about it. And then if you want to learn how to get a discount, stay tuned to the end and we'll share that with you as well. Okay, so our icebreaker for today. Haley, what have you noticed is a big source of inspiration to you for this upcoming fall season?
I think that looking at the inspiration that I've gathered to this point, a big source of inspiration for me is, this is like groundbreaking fall stuff, layers, texture, but also something else that is something that was not in my previous fall plans is maybe some more unexpected colors and patterns.
Like what? What kind of colors?
I'm really drawn to like a rust red right now. I don't have a lot of red in my wardrobe, but I just love how it's looking with the rest of my color palette. It feels like something that's kind of missing. So I'm excited to see how I can incorporate that coming up. It's also just I'm really inspired by the feeling that my personal sense of fall, which is like very much about like family and returning to being home more often. So I've included some images in my inspiration that kind of evoke that feeling.
Nice.
What about you? What's your inspiration?
Well, one thing I've been really inspired by for spring and summer as well, but as I'm heading into fall, I'm noticing it again, which is more of a Scandinavian style. I'm really inspired by the looks that you can see in cities like Copenhagen and Stockholm and some of the bloggers from that area of the world. I really just love Scandinavian style. I remember the first time I went to Stockholm and just how impeccable everybody looked. A lot of neutral colors, like very simple, clean, but also there's kind of a romance to it at the same time. And those things really appeal to me. So I'm getting really inspired by more of a Scandi style right now.
Cute.
Yeah. That's my biggest inspiration right now. So if you have an icebreaker for us for a future episode, you can leave it for us. If you're a Seamwork member, just go to seamwork.com/go/icebreakers. And that particular icebreaker kind of warmed us up for the discussion today, which is going to be all about gathering inspiration. So if you're not familiar with Design Your Wardrobe, what it is it's a 4-week program that we run twice a year that helps you to design your wardrobe for the upcoming season and then create a sewing queue out of that for the upcoming season. So it's sort of like a little capsule wardrobe that fits into your existing wardrobe. And it's a really fun and really comprehensive program. But a big part of that fun is really doing it along with other folks twice a year and experiencing all of that collective excitement as a community. So we wanted to bring a taste of that to the podcast this month by sharing our own process for Design Your Wardrobe. So between the two of us, Haley and I have done this program many, many times over. So not only are we going to be discussing our own plans, but you'll get some great tips along the way as well. So that brings us to week 1, which is what we're talking about today, which is all about gathering your inspiration. So what we do this week is take all of our inspiration for the upcoming season and gather it all in one place. And this gets us ready for next week when we actually start constructing a mood board. So this step of the process can be really, really fun, but poring over all the possibilities can also feel really overwhelming. So that's what we're going to be talking about today and giving you some tips all around that. To start us off, Haley, for yourself, are you working digitally or are you working analog?
At this stage in the process, I'm still working digitally. I find that what's most important for me in this stage is to not be too precious and just kind of really like intuitively add things as I come across them. And I find that for me personally, if I move into analog at this stage, I start editing myself too soon. Yeah. And I don't want to be editing right now.
I feel the same way. I also use digital tools like Pinterest throughout the year to kind of collect things as I go. So it's sort of natural to begin there by looking through what I already have and just using that to collect everything in one place. But I agree with what you're saying. I think it's really helpful not to worry too much about making decisions, and working digitally just allows you to do that. I feel like that's the great thing about analog too, is that it forces you to make decisions.
Yes.
And that's why it's so helpful to me later in the process.
I totally agree. So we're talking about digital tools. What digital tools are you using?
Right now, I am using Pinterest for the most part. So I've started kind of going through all my existing Pinterest boards and just collecting things. So I have a few different Pinterest boards. And we talked about this before, I think on the podcast and also on YouTube, about our methods for collecting things on Pinterest. But I feel like that's a really good place for me to start. So I just kind of take everything that I've got in all these various boards. So I've got my core style board. I've got one that's specific for fall and winter. So if, it's the middle of summer and I see a really cool sweater dress or something, I have a place to put it for later. So I go through all of those and then just start grabbing whatever calls my attention and putting it all in one place. So yeah. What about you? Do you use other digital tools or mostly Pinterest?
At this stage, I only am using Pinterest. Later on, I start using Illustrator. I'll use like eyedropper tool to like start building some color palettes and things like that, but not quite yet. Right now, I'm just purely Pinterest. If I was not a Pinterest user and I wanted to still stay digital for all of the reasons that we just discussed, I would probably just make a folder on my phone or on my computer and start dropping things into that folder.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good way to go. I know a lot of people, I don't really use Instagram anymore, but I know a lot of people also keep folders on Instagram, inspiring images that they come across there and kind of sort them in folders there. So that could be another place for you if that's something that you do throughout the year.
Yeah, I save things on Instagram and then I never go back and look at what I save, because it's like you have to like go to your profile, and it's kind of, for me, not a place I wander.
Yeah.
Except for haircuts.
Something about haircuts.
Something about haircuts. I'm like, oh, I saw cute ones on Instagram. I think I saved those.
Well, I guess it's because you have a use for them, when you're getting your haircut. It's more like something you seek out versus something you browse, I guess.
Like, oh, crud, I have an appointment tomorrow. What am I doing?
I think you can also, if you use Pinterest, you can also pin from Instagram as well. So you can, if you want to collect everything in one place. Another a digital tool that I use, I don't typically use it at this stage, and I'll probably talk a little bit more about it next week as we talk about mood boards, but there's a tool I've mentioned a few times called Milanote that I've used, and it's a digital tool that allows you to create kind of digital mood boards and put images there, but also color swatches and notes and text and headings and all kinds of stuff. So you can really build kind of in the same way you would an analog mood board, just put a lot of stuff, different kinds of stuff on there, as opposed to just what you find on Pinterest. So that's a really cool tool if you want to incorporate things other than just images, just straight up images.
So while we're talking about Pinterest and inspiration, where are you looking for inspiration when you're out there hunting it down?
I think, again, Pinterest is a good place to find inspiration in my Pinterest feed, because Pinterest, the algorithm just knows what types of images I like and finds other images that are similar. So I find that to be, also a good place to find recipes. That's probably my primary use of Pinterest. I still read blogs. I know that they're kind of out of fashion with social media being the thing now, but I do read blogs. I like the kind of depth you get in seeing into somebody's life in a more like journalistic sort of way. So sometimes I find inspiration there. Designers that I enjoy, there's a few designers that I love the overall look and feel. And Also, vintage. I feel like that's a big source of inspiration for me. So just looking at vintage clothing on vintage stores online or in person. Also looking through places like eBay or Etsy and just seeing really beautiful vintage clothing, kind of pulling out details and colors and fabrics. I think that's a really big source of inspiration for me. What about you?
I would say something that I have trained myself to do over the years is to constantly be gathering inspiration. So I feel like it's more a question of like, where do I not look for inspiration? I'm always looking for things. I take pictures on my phone. I like that you can upload things to Instagram. A lot of times I'll like just create a private board where I'll just upload like a cool sleeve cup I see at a thrift store, or when I'm like at a ready-to-wear store, if I see like a painting I really like or a wall that's a color that I really like, I just constantly gather everything. And I feel like as a designer, which all of you here are listening to this, I encourage you to think of yourself that way, or as an artist, it's your job to filter all of that stuff. So start treating yourself like, you know, that filter. So I'm always looking for inspiration, and I'm always gathering it and storing it on Pinterest primarily. So when it comes time to design sewing patterns, like it is my job to do, or time to design my upcoming season of clothing for myself personally, I already have this vast well of inspiration to draw from. And I find that when I'm really good about doing that, that what I produce is so much more authentic because I'm not scrambling to like get a bunch of new stuff and grab just anything that speaks to me in any way at all. So yeah, that's how I come across my inspiration. Very long-winded.
Yeah. I feel the same way. I'm kind of always in that magpie mode of grabbing things that seem interesting to me or sketching little details that I see, looking at books, that kind of thing, and just trying to pull from it all the time, even if it's something out of season, like I mentioned earlier. Having different seasonal boards on Pinterest has been really helpful to me so that when it comes time to do something like design your wardrobe or start a design process, I have a place that I can go that I've collected things over time, over the years, over the last few months, and it speeds up the process quite a bit. And from there, I can kind of start filtering things and seeing what I feel like right now in the moment.
Yeah, and the patterns become so much more significant when we gather all of this inspiration over time, because you can see what maybe was something you were attracted to in one particular moment versus something that you've been really drawn to over a longer span of time.
Yeah.
So if you were to take one thing away from this episode, I would say, you know, always be magpieing.
Another thing that I do that I find really helpful on Pinterest. So on Pinterest, you can have subboards within your boards. So if you want to learn more about this, I mentioned before we did a video and an article about this. So if you're interested, you can see that. We'll put it in the show notes, but the URL is seamwork.com/articles. Oh, it's got kind of a long name. How to maintain an effective Pinterest inspiration board. And there are dashes between each of those words. That's long. We'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, definitely.
So you can find that, or you could probably Google it and come across it. But one of the things that I do that's I find really helpful, I have one board that I call ideas or something like that. And within that, I have a fall, winter section, and I have a spring summer section, which I've kind of mentioned. When I pin things into those boards, I also have separate subboards within that for different pieces, like individual garments that I notice. So I can kind of gather together outfit ideas that involve blue jeans, for example, or outfit ideas that involve a pretty white blouse or something like that. So I can see how to style these different items that I'm drawn to. And that really helps me because then I can kind of go through them and see, okay, which of these do I already own and just need to style differently? Or which of these do I not own and could actually come up with some really cool outfits for the upcoming season with? So I find that really, really, really helpful that's a little tip for you guys if that's something that sounds like it would be useful to you too. So I have, just as an example, I mentioned blue jeans, a white shirt, button-up Oxford, a blazer, things like that. And then you can kind of decide whether these are maybe the items that form kind of the core of your wardrobe. These are kind of your basic pieces. And maybe you want to do a variation on them for the upcoming season.
Yeah.
So I really like that for myself.
Yeah, I love using the subfolder feature on Pinterest, and it's something I utilize later on in Design Your Wardrobe. Eventually, I'll move my mood board into an analog mood board. And then at that point, my Pinterest board I like to start treating it more like a project queue. So I'll start to see the patterns like quilted jacket and all of my inspiration that pertains to that, or even just colors that I feel like would be really great for that, fabrics, patterns that I might use for it. I put all of that into the subboard and I can start kind of arranging a queue in that way. And then you can kind of see what the outliers are. Like, I have a lot of quilted jackets and I have a lot of denim shirts, but I only have this one pink cardigan. Do I like that, or do I just like the model's hair? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
It allows you to like analyze what you have a little bit deeper, I find.
And see what goes with what too. Also kind of seeing it all together like that.
Yeah, I totally agree. So what kind of images do you like to include in your mood board?
I include a lot of different types of images when it comes to creating a mood board. So in this initial phase of gathering all the inspiration for it, I try to include not just things that are obvious, like garments that appeal to me, but also things like like print pattern, colors, even textures, maybe specific fabrics that I'm really drawn to. I include artwork that's interesting to me, or that has kind of a palette that's interesting to me. I include even like accessories, shoes, maybe things I already own can be a great thing to include, because you can start to see how it works with the stuff you already have. Because that's a big thing for me. I really want to, when I design my wardrobe for a season, I really want it to encourage me to use what I already have as well. Because I think it's very easy to lose track of what you already own and kind of be on to the next thing and be in this kind of consumptive cycle of just more. And I like that Design Your Wardrobe can be used in a way to encourage yourself to look back and see all this great stuff you've already made, or all this great stuff you already own that maybe you wore a lot last year and you can bring out again. So I like to include a few things like that. So that's another tip, that if you make something and you post it on the CMART community or you post it on Instagram, you can also pin that to Pinterest.
Yeah.
And then you have kind of this catalog of things that you can draw from that you already own. Or if it's something you bought, you can also pin the image from a website or something like that and start kind of maintaining a little catalog of things that you already have, which for me, that's really important, to wear what I already have as well as making new stuff. What about you? What kinds of images do you like to include?
I mean, well, of course, clothing. I like to make sure that when I am pinning images of clothing, there's a few things I like to pay attention to. Kind of like thinking of it as like zooming in and zooming out. I like to look at the styling of an overall outfit. I find that to be really inspirational, especially later on when we start building looks. I like things that are more focused. Maybe it's just on a singular garment. And then I also like to make sure I'm including things that have really close-up images of little details that I'm really drawn to, because I find that that adds a lot of richness to the clothing that you're going to create. It's also going to just make a more visually appealing mood board to make sure that you have kind of these different zoomed in views of garments. In addition to that, fabric, any kind of like textile design or surface treatment, I find really inspirational. Just straight up like paint chips or color swatches. When I was in school, sometimes we would use like bits of thread wound around like a piece of cardstock or something like that. So you can get kind of creative in how you represent color in your mood board. Illustrations or art. in my most recent mood board, I have like a tablescape illustration that just is like, back to what I was saying before about that coziness and like intimacy of the home that I feel fall and winter evokes. I wanted some things that were reflective of that. So I have like a portrait of like a family on a bed with like a handmade quilt that I just think is like really cute and pretty. All sorts of things. Sometimes I include pictures of the landscape because I think it lends context to where the clothing will be worn.
That's a great idea.
So like here in Oregon, it's going to be gray and misty and wet. And so I often will include a landscape of something like that. I kind of just whatever.
Yeah. I love the landscape idea because I think for me, it's good to remind myself of the climate and especially the mud situation. Not so much in fall, more in winter than in fall. Fall is actually here in Oregon fairly sunny and dry.
Yeah.
It's when you get into winter that it gets real muddy. But I want my clothes to last for, the whole season beyond fall.
Fall also feels really short here.
Yeah, it does. I love October, though. It's such a beautiful month.
It's gorgeous.
But anyway, the mud situation is kind of crazy. And here where I live in the country, it's, we have gravel roads and it's very dirty. So that's something I've been trying to make sure that I keep in mind as I pull inspiration, that, like a maxi length white dress might be really beautiful with black boots and tights, but it's going to get filthy. I love light colors. I really love pale colors, but I have to use them in a smart way in the later seasons of the year. So I think that's a really good idea of incorporating that. And also the lifestyle kind of representation that you have there. Like, this is how I want my life to look in this season. And so how can I design a wardrobe that evokes those feelings for me?
Yeah, I think that, Design Your Wardrobe is really great at digging into all of that. And in week 2, we dig into context pretty deeply. But I like to start thinking about it in this mood board phase a bit too.
Yeah. And I think if you're interested in this kind of stuff, the style workshop also, which is kind of the precursor, sort of the pre-homework for Design Your Wardrobe, you don't have to do it, but it's helpful, also really digs into a lot of these deeper questions around your style. I think that can be super, super helpful. So we can link to that in the show notes as well.
And oh my gosh, I forgot to mention flats.
Oh, yeah.
Flats. I put flats in my mood boards all the time.
Flats.
We actually have a flats PDF that's really helpful when you're doing the Design Your Wardrobe process or just like making a mood board just for funsies. Has all of the seamwork flats all in one place, so you can just print out the page you need, cut it out, slap it on the old mood board. It's great. And we can link to that in the show notes as well.
When I'm gathering inspiration over time, I love to pin flats from seamwork or, any other pattern that I'm thinking of using, or, even just the images from the pattern page itself. I also have this might be another tip for some of you. If you're a seamwork member, obviously you have access to a ton of patterns there and you want to be able to use them. So one thing that I do in addition is have a separate board on Pinterest that's just called Seamwork Project Ideas. And I just pin inspirational images that I think, oh, I could hack a pattern into this, or I could make it in this fabric to look like this, just to give me ideas of different ways that I can use the patterns I already have access to. So that's a great idea. It doesn't have to only be seamwork patterns. If you have a pattern collection, you could put patterns you already own in there as well. But I find that really, really helpful because when I start Design Your Wardrobe, I can look at it now and see, oh, that was such a cool idea. Here's a detail I can do. I think I would wear that a lot this fall. So that's great. And obviously, it's kind of nice to use the patterns that you already have or that you might have thought about using in the past.
Yeah.
So great idea if you're a Steamwork member, especially.
Well, as we go on and on about all of our different sources of inspiration, it makes me wonder, I'm curious, Sarai, do you ever experience any inspiration overwhelm? And if so, like, how do you deal with that?
That's a good question. I think for me, it's not so much inspiration overwhelm. It's more inspiration that I can actually end up using in the end. So at this phase, I don't feel that overwhelmed because I know, and I think that's a great thing about the design your wardrobe process is that it's iterative. So you're kind of culling over time.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm in the early stages, I'm just looking at all of this cool stuff and, pulling here, pulling there. And I don't feel that overwhelmed until I start having to make decisions because I know I can only sew so many things and I'm not going to be able to make all the things that I would like to make. So that's when I start to get a little bit overwhelmed, and it's good to have a process for me to turn to help me make those decisions. But I think early on, it's very open at this stage. What about you? Do you feel that way, or do you feel more?
Sometimes I can feel that way. I can get a little bit overwhelmed feeling, but I just have to remind myself that we're not making decisions today. We're just gathering what feels true in this moment, and adding judgment into that does not help.
Yeah.
Judgment does not really help your creativity flourish. So I just try to remove that from the equation. I can judge things later on when I have to make choices.
Yeah.
That's useful. Judgment on my inspiration is not necessarily useful.
Yeah. I think one place that I might get a little overwhelmed is all the different sources of inspiration. So I mentioned, I collect things throughout the year like you do, but then there are things like, my favorites on Etsy. Like there's some vintage clothing on there that I thought would be really cool to incorporate. And then there's, maybe some pictures that I saved from Flickr or whatever. That's where I'm like, did I get everything that's really inspiring me right now? Is it all kind of still scattered? So that's where it can be a little overwhelming. But that's why I think gathering stuff over time in one place like Pinterest is so helpful.
Yeah. I would say if someone is struggling with what you just described, what I would suggest to them is a timer is going to be your best friend. Set a 5-minute timer and write down all of the places that you've gathered inspiration over the last 6 months. And then give yourself 10 minutes to migrate that inspiration onto a singular source. Just 10 minutes for each source, 10 minutes on Etsy, 10 minutes on Instagram, whatever, wherever it is you gather. Because, there's always going to be undiscovered things, more inspiration out there. And it's not about finding all of it.
Yeah. It's just about creating, what feels right for you right now. I love your timer tricks. I used one last night, actually, after I was sewing all day. My office here was a mess and it was kind of getting late and I didn't want to clean it up. I thought, what would Haley do? She'd just set a timer for 10 minutes.
I would. All the time for my daughter, I set timers when the timer goes off, it's time to go take a bath. And sometimes she'll come home, my husband will pick her up from school, and I'll be utilizing a timer for myself. And she'll be like, wait, what's happening? What's the timer for? And I'm like, that's a mommy timer.
Like a Pavlovian response.
Yeah, she totally does.
She just gets in the bath when the timer goes off. That's funny.
I'm a timer queen, that's for sure. Okay, so I have one more question left in the discussion section, and that question is, do you find yourself jumping to the planning part of Design Your Wardrobe when you're still in this gathering phase? I know I do. And if so, how do you try to stay in the moment?
I think that's a great question. And yes, definitely I do find myself doing that. I want to immediately pick out the garments from all the inspiration I'm gathering. Just because when you're feeling inspired, you're feeling inspired and you start thinking about what you can do with it. And I don't think there's a problem with that necessarily, because I think you can kind of take those ideas, put them in your back pocket and come back to them later. So I don't think it's necessarily a problem unless you kind of decide to just skip the rest of the design process and just choose a few things, because I think then you're just kind of leaving out maybe some of the deeper questions that you could ask yourself that we go through in Design Your Wardrobe, but also the more contextual questions like building the color palette, incorporating what you already have, those kinds of things, choosing fabrics. I think if you kind of just jump to the execution point, then you have a chance of missing out on some of that. So that's what I try to do, is just if I start getting inspired into making actual garments, I just set them aside and know that I can come back to them later.
Yeah. I kind of have two ways of dealing with this. One is just reminding myself that I'm going to like you said, I'm going to kind of miss out on a lot of richness if I try to jump into the plan and the execution too soon. And the other way that I deal with this is that if I get like really hung up on an idea, like I'm really hung up on a green, like full length jacket, then I'll allow myself to go down like a little bit of a rabbit hole for the inspiration behind that. So I'll look at different jackets or coats that I've pinned over the years. I'll look at like fabric and just to like pin. I'll look at different pockets that I think would be really great on a jacket like that, and kind of allow yourself to like go down that rabbit hole a little bit, but stay firmly rooted in the inspiration zone.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great approach. I think it's important to give yourself just enough freedom while still maintaining the process you've kind of set for yourself.
Yeah. Cause like you said, if you're feeling creative, then like, you know, who am I to stop you? Go for it. But maybe harness that creativity and focus it on gathering your inspiration.
Yeah. All right. Well, just to recap what we talked about today, we talked about the process of gathering inspiration, and we shared a number of ways that we do that, primarily digitally at this point, using Pinterest. And we both shared some tips for using Pinterest that have been helpful to us, like having a place to pin outfit ideas, having a place to pin individual garments that you're really interested in, having a place to pin things that are seasonally appropriate for different seasons, and the importance of gathering inspiration throughout the entire year in a way that you can come back to it really easily as a part of your ongoing design process. And we also talked about things you can include in your gathering process. So not just pictures of garments, but lifestyle images, landscapes, color palettes, fabric, all kinds of stuff you can start gathering right now. And we also talked about the importance of letting yourself just be free and creative at this point and not jumping too soon into execution. So I think my big takeaway from this episode is just the importance of maintaining your sense of creative freedom early on in a design process. I think creativity often has two phases to it. And one is the more open, receptive gathering phase. And one of them is the more focused execution phase. And I think it's really important to know where you are in that process, and that in this beginning stage, we're really in that very open gathering place. So I think that's a really good thing to keep in mind about any creative project, really. Yeah. But for Design Your Wardrobe in particular, I think that works really well. What about you? What's your big takeaway today?
I guess my big takeaway would be more of a piece of advice just from observing people do the Design Your Wardrobe process over and over again, is to, I feel like people really get caught up in judging themselves and judging their inspiration at this point in the game. And I just would encourage you to not do that, to really stay in the moment and try and have fun with it. And if it doesn't feel easy yet, I can promise you that it will get easier over time, and just don't take it too seriously. It's supposed to be like a fun and useful exercise. And I think that when you like insert too much like judgment into it, you're going to rob yourself of like the joy of the process. So that's my big sister advice.
That's great advice. I like that a lot. And if you haven't joined the Design Your Wardrobe party yet, make sure to check it out. You can do that at seamwork.com/go/DYW. And it's totally free for Seamwork members. So if you're a Seamwork member, just go there and sign up and you'll get access right away. And if you liked this episode, be sure to leave us a review. We have a review today from Cass McKay 23, and she said, "Love it. This podcast is my favorite listen while walking in the woods or sewing in my studio. It makes me nostalgic for walk and talks with my crafty bestie who moved away. Aw. Great production, interesting topics, and inclusive values. I love Seamwork. Oh, thanks, Cass.
We love you.
That's awesome. Yes, we love all of you. Thank you for listening. We really, really appreciate each and every one of you. You're just such an awesome audience. And we love hearing from you too. So if you have a review that you want to leave us, we might read it on a future episode. So you can also follow us on YouTube at Seamwork Video. Haley and I hang out there all the time as well. Another great place to leave comments also. You can also follow us on Instagram at Seamwork. And if you'd like to join Seamwork and become part of our private community, plus get access to hundreds of sewing patterns and dozens of sew-along classes, our podcast listeners get a 50% off lifetime discount when you join at seamwork.com/go/podcast50. So that's seamwork.com/go/podcast50. And if you want to sign up for Design Your Wardrobe, you can do that before August 11th using that link that I just gave you at seamwork.com/go/podcast50. Get 50% off your membership, and then you'll have access to the entire Design Your Wardrobe program. And if you're listening to this after August 11th and you missed the sign up, you can still do it as a standalone, what's the word I'm looking for? Self-guided program as well. So that's available year round. So again, that's seamwork.com/go/podcast50. And that does it for us this week. We'll be back next week to talk about mood boards. I'm Sarai.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio.
Seamwork Radio is brought to you by the team at Seamwork. Seamwork's an online community that supports you in creating a wardrobe that feels right for you. When you join us at Seamwork, you become part of our private community of makers, and you also get access to monthly sew-along classes, a library of over 200 sewing patterns, and tons of great resources to help guide you through the sewing adventure that you choose. Podcast listeners can get half off a Seamwork Unlimited membership, which means you can download as many of those 200 plus patterns as you want at any time, and our community will be there to guide and support you. If you'd like to join us for half off, just visit seamwork.com/go/podcast50. You can also find us on Instagram at Seamwork, or visit our YouTube channel, which is called Seamwork Video. We love hearing from you, so let us know if there's a topic or a personal story that you'd like us to cover. Thanks for listening to Seamwork Radio.